Hi, I'm Julia Vanderwick from Artwork Atrium, and I really love to knit, and I love to knit sweaters especially. And today I'd like to tell you the story of the forest cardigan. And this is the first sweater that I ever designed. It goes way beyond modifications on a pattern, and it is essentially a self-portrait as cardigan. And here's how it all started. I found a beautiful skein of handspun yarn from my friend Laura at the corner of Knit and Tea. And then I knew that I wanted to use that as a centerpiece for some kind of colorwork sweater. And so I located two complementary colors from the Plucky Knitter. And I got what I thought would be a sweater quantity because I didn't really know what yardage to make. And I sat there and I stared at these beautiful materials for quite some time because I didn't know what to do next. So I did draw out some sketches of the sweater that I wanted. And I knew that I wanted it to be like a classic cardigan, but I also wanted it to be a colorwork yoke and use the steek techniques and colorwork charting techniques that I've learned from working with Alice Starmore fisherman sweaters. Beyond that, I had no idea what to do. And I didn't know how you approached the construction when you're designing your sweater. And I didn't know if you should start swatching or if you should do the math or what. So instead of letting my brain spin indefinitely, what I did was I went and got some resources. I looked up information online that along the lines of improvising your own sweater. Like, how would you even, if you just wanted to start knitting a sweater, how would you even approach that? And then I found at my local yarn shop 2 additional books on making top-down sweaters that I found to be very helpful. And those were the Coco Knits Sweater Workshop and the Elizabeth Doherty Top-Down Sweater book. And those 2 were very important to setting my brain right and knowing what my process might start to be. Because the Coco Knits Sweater Workshop is a book that has a method for making top-down sweaters with set-in sleeves in the round that can either be a cardigan or a pullover. And it includes a way to calculate where you want the increases to be while you're working on the yoke and the neckline using a chart and using color-coded stitch holders. And I liked that idea a lot. It seemed like I could just kind of start once I had my gauge. But it didn't solve my problem about I wanted to make a classic-looking cardigan. And so there happens to be the perfect pattern in the Elizabeth Doherty top-down sweater book. And it had the fit and styling that I was looking for. The only problem was that the yarn gauge was different from the yarn that I had. So off the bat, I would need to be calculating for a different stitch count and different row count for the yarns that I'm actually using. So that's what I did first, I believe. I took her schematic from that pattern and I made my gauge swatch and I found out what fabric I would like and figured out the needle sizes from there. And then I did the math to convert that cardigan pattern to what my gauge actually was. And then I still didn't really know how to work in the color work around the yoke, but I just decided to jump on in and I fit the numbers that I had worked out for the cardigan into the worksheet for the Coco Knits Sweater Workshop method. And I just started knitting with my handspun. I did that until I got to obviously I did that until I got to the part where I wanted to start doing my color work, which was when the scoop of the neck joined together at the center. And so at that point, I had a stitch count for how many stitches around, and I had sections for the sleeves and sections for the front and the back. And so then I went to work with my pencils and graph paper. I got out the Alice Starmore color work book as a reference, again, just to look at charts. And I knew that I wanted to tell a story about the California mixed forest. And that forest is a mixture of redwood trees, madrones, manzanita, oak trees. There's meadows with wildflowers, and very often you can see a peak of the Pacific Ocean or the bay. In my case, it would either be the San Francisco Bay or the Monterey Bay in the distance, depending on which forest you're at. And so I also wanted my color work to evoke the style of my painting. I do a lot of landscape painting, and I wanted this to be the knitted version of how I would paint the California forest. And so I tried a lot of different ways to make a painting like that and a drawing like that be knitting charts. Some of the leaf patterns that I have here are based on charts from the Alice Starmore book and then modified to fit the story I wanted to tell. And then some of the other ones are 100% my drawing. I've got a lot of iterations of those designs on there based on whatever the stitch count was at the point of the sweater I was at. And right away, I decided to do a different color work pattern on the sleeves from the front and back to make my math easier, because these numbers were changing, because I'm still doing the increases to make the armhole and to increase for the bust. I wanted something relatively simple on the sweater sleeve. And so I looked at another favorite color work resource that I have, which is the Mitten Book, which is a collection of colorwork charts for mittens based on the Swedish tradition in Gotland. And so I took one of their suggested border patterns and modified it to work for the numbers that I had for my sleeve pattern. And it was a relatively low stitch repeat. And so it was pretty easy for me to extend it as the fabric expanded as I worked through the yoke. I just did my designing like that on the fly as I knit in the round. And because I had already done that Alice Starmore Pharaoh sweater, I knew that I would be steeking to make the cardigan. And so I had some extra stitches in the middle, and I proceeded in that way using the worksheet from Coco Knits, the numbers from Elizabeth Doherty, and the color work ideas and techniques that I'd learned from Alice Starmore. Immediately when I got to the waist shaping, I realized that my waist has its own shaping needs. And so the numbers that I had done for how many rows that I would need to go in at the waist and then out again, I needed a much faster decrease and increase than I had accounted for using my row gauge. If you look, I don't know if you can really see how intense the increases and decreases are. If you look at the back of my sweater, you might be able to get a sense of it. But that was an interesting thing that I learned as I went about making something fit my own body. Then there was another new technique that I learned while knitting down the body, which was inset pockets. And I just took this straight from the cardigan pattern, and I'm really pleased. Now I will put pockets in everything, was my thought, for sure. And they're great. They're comfy, nice and warm. And so after I was done knitting the body and the sleeves, well, actually, before I was done, let's rewind. Something that happened while I was finishing up the sweater, you can see that most of the color on the body and the sleeves are this dark green color. And that also, I wanted that to be the finishing touches color. And what happened, of course, is that I ran out because I didn't know how much yardage I was going to need when I bought my yarn. And I went back to the dyer and they didn't have any. I wasn't able to get another skein from the dyer. And so I started searching elsewhere, and I was able to find a person on Ravelry who had one extra skein of just this color, and they sold it to me. And I was able to finish the sweater without worrying about yardage so much. I did do all the finishing touches from the cardigan pattern, and it has got this lovely braid that really gives a nice clean line where the button band and the neckband come in, and finishing the pockets in a pleasing way so that they look really nice with the bottom ribbing and everything. And now I will tell you about another thing that I would do differently if I were going to do this again. Is I would wash and block my pieces before I picked up stitches for the neckline or the button band. Because I don't know if you can tell by looking at it, but I had to do that 3 or 4 times because it never laid right. I either had too few stitches or too many, mostly too many. And even now it's not quite the most perfect neckline that could ever be. I don't know why I didn't think of, when you're working in pieces, wash and block them before you put on something like a button band or a neckline, because that's going to give you your true finished measurement. And so that's going to give you the best chance of picking up around the right number of stitches evenly. So I would definitely I definitely do that now when I make sweaters that have that kind of finishing or that are worked in pieces. I mentioned that this is a steeked sweater. And so before I even picked up my stitches for the button band, I, of course, had to cut the sweater up in half and secure the edges somehow. And I had spent a lot of time and effort doing this on my first steeked project, which I have this video about. And when I got to this on this sweater, it occurred to me, I'm not really using the traditional yarns used for steeking. I've got hand spun, which had a very drapey quality to it. And then I've mixed that into superwash merino, which is not sticky, right? So I didn't know how the steek binding would work out. But to be honest, I got kind of tired after I did the first side, and I sewed it down with back stitching so it would be nice and secure. And then the second side, I looked at it and went, meh, I'm just going to leave it like that. And so I've done that, and you can see the difference. Here's the secured side, and here's the unsecured side. And it's been several years now. And guess what? They're both fine. I discovered that I didn't have to worry quite as much about my steeks being secured using a gauge like this, even with superwash yarn. So I'm pretty happy about that. And it's also very amusing for me to have this steek experiment ongoing whenever I wear this sweater. So anyways, like I said before, this is my self-portrait as Cardigan. This is colorwork knitting as though I would paint it. And it is my heart's rendition of the California forest. I wear this sweater anytime I want to just show up as me. This is me. I'm going to wear this one. So I hope you've enjoyed this story. And if you would like to see more of my content, please like and subscribe. I have a blog over at Artwork Atrium. My Instagram is Art Music Julia, and I'm on Blue Sky as Artist Julia. So I hope to see you again soon.